Hey everybody, this is chapter 4 of Marx Labor Power Working Class by Mario Tronti. Chapter 4 is titled Woe to June. But then came the lightning bolt of 1848. Even for Marx, this was a hoped for but feared moment, one that had been predicted but not prepared for. Europe was suddenly awoken from Europe's bourgeois slumber. Quote, by dictating the republic to the provisional government, and through the provisional government to the whole of France, the proletariat stepped into the foreground forthwith as an independent party. End quote. Marx, or Marx and Engels' collected works. Of course, the proletarians did not thereby conquer revolutionary emancipation itself, but the proletarians did conquer the terrain of the struggle for that same emancipation. The proletarians had made the February Revolution together with the bourgeoisie. The proletarians now sought to bring the proletarians' interest to bear alongside the bourgeoisie and not against the bourgeoisie. Quote, as soon as it has risen up, a class in which the revolutionary interests of society are concentrated finds the content and the material for its revolutionary activity directly in its own situation. Foes to be laid down, measures to be taken, dictated by the needs of the struggle, of the consequences of its own deeds drive it on. It makes no theoretical inquiries into its own task. The French working class had not attained this level. The French working class was still incapable of accomplishing its own revolution. End quote. Marx and Engels' collected work. The struggle against capital in capital's modern form, at an already advanced level of development, the struggle of the industrial salariat against the industrial capitalist, was in France still a very partial phenomenon. Quote, the struggle against capital's secondary modes of exploitation, end quote. Marx and Engels' collected work. Blended into the general uprising against the financial aristocracy. In this sense, the February Republic was truly the bourgeois republic and nothing more, albeit a bourgeois republic conquered by the proletarians with the passive aid of the bourgeoisie. And the proletarians, quote, rightly regarded themselves as the victors of February, and the proletarians made the arrogant claims of victors, end quote. Marx and Engels' collected works. However, not only did the proletarians' demands not coincide with the bourgeoisie's, but the proletarians' demands contradicted the bourgeoisie's demands. This contradiction in demands opposed two camps with contrasting objectives, not only on the political level but also in the social realm. On the one side alone was the Paris proletariat, and on the other all the factors of the bourgeoisie and all layers of French society, now all welcomed into the circle of the Republican authorities. A contest of this kind could only be resolved with arms. These proletarians had to be defeated in the streets. Quote, they had to be shown that they were worsted as soon as they did not fight with the bourgeoisie but against the bourgeoisie, end quote. Marx and Engels' collected works. Quote, these proletarians answered on the 22nd of June with the tremendous insurrection in which the first great battle was fought between the two classes that split modern society, end quote. Marx and Engels' collected works. Long trains of men and women crisscrossed the city repeating, quote, bread or lead, lead or bread, end quote. On the morning of June 23rd, barricades were erected. What Marx a few days later called Der proletarische Löwe, the proletarian lion, was now on its feet. The menace of the proletariat in arms had taken to the stage of history. It had been compelled to mount its insurrection, and its doom was already contained within this fact. On the workers' side in the class struggle, only an attacking strategy can secure victory, and the defeat now convinced Marx of a definitive truth. Quote, the slightest improvement in its position remains a utopia within the bourgeois republic, a utopia that becomes a crime as soon as it wants to become a reality, end quote. Marx Engels collected work. After the defeat of June, there would no longer be a place in the proletariat's political class struggle for, quote, demands to be wrested from the adversary as concessions. Rather, in future, it would be replaced by the fiery slogan of revolutionary struggle, quote, tear down the bourgeoisie for the dictatorship of the working class, end quote. Advancing in its development, the bourgeoisie would respond with the bourgeoisie's own program, the dominion of capital and the enslavement of labor, but it would henceforth find itself faced with the irreconcilable, invincible proletarian enemy, quote, invincible because its very existence is a condition of the bourgeoisie's existence, end quote. The proletarian defeat in June thus created, for the first time, the conditions within which the initiative for a workers' revolution could take shape. The proletarian defeat in June, full historical significance lay in this very fact. Quote, February 25th, 1848 had granted the Republic to France. June 25th thrust the revolution upon her. And revolution after June meant overthrow of bourgeois society, whereas before February it had meant overthrow of the form of government, end quote. It was 1848 that revealed to Marx a classic revolutionary movement of the working class. Or, and this is not the same thing, based on the earlier development of Marx's point of view, Marx found himself ready to see a movement of this kind within the events of 1848 in Paris. Engels says in Engels' reminiscences on Marx's activity with the Neue Rheinische Zeitung that, quote, the insurrection of the Paris workers in June 1848 found us at our post. From the first shot, we were unconditionally on the side of the insurgents. After their defeat, Marx paid tribute to the vanquished in one of his most powerful articles, end quote. Marx Engels collected works. By chance or foresight, at that moment Marx found himself in possession of an instrument through which Marx could publicly issue his political judgments. On the 1st of June 1848, the first issue of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung was published, and the practical, immediately political origin of what would be called Marx's, quote, historical works, the class struggles in France, the 18th Brumaire, and so on, later published elsewhere, should be sought out within the pages of this same paper. Any historian reading these works as a historian will all too easily find basic grammatical errors. But there is no revolutionary workers' leader who does not have to turn back to this political source periodically, each time to decide and practice a mode of conduct in the class struggle. The experience of editing this paper at the turn of 1848 and 1849 was a fundamentally important turning point in Marx's discourse on labor and capital. We realize as much immediately afterward, indeed precisely from the form of his, quote, historical, end quote, works. These politically crude, violent, sectarian, one-sided writings are not justified by the facts, but they have a clear-sightedness in foreseeing future developments such as only class hatred could provide. And in these writings we see, for the first time, the overlapping and conjugation of the abstract concept of labor and the concrete reality of the worker. The synthesis is that of an already wholly defined idea of the proletariat, not only solely intuited through the power of Marx's genius, as it had been in his previous works, but this concept of the proletariat did not yet contain all the characteristics of what would become the working class. For us, it is satisfying to see the same historical succession, the same logical difference between the proletarian and the worker that we already found between the seller of labor power and the producer of surplus value. The proletarian is the simple elementary political figure and, for this reason, the more general class form of the industrial worker, of the wage laborer in industry. After June 1848, the particular character of the commodity labor power presented itself on the political terrain as the proletariat, not simply the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, but against all of bourgeois society, and not only in the form of a democratic opposition, but in the organization of a violent alternative to the established power, a class in arms against the whole of society as if it, too, were another single class. From this point, the discourse on labor and labor power, on labor and capital, became definitively intertwined with the political analysis of workers' movements in workers' movements' permanent struggle against capital, searching for the laws that alone can decide the practical solution to any theoretical problem. From this point, no one who identifies with Marx's working class perspective can continue to divide these levels among themselves. If we need further persuasion on this, we need only follow again in Marx the process through which labor power is ever more wrapped up with the working class as the development of capital advances. That's the end of chapter 4 of Marx, Labor Power, Working Class by Mario Tronti. Chapter 4 was titled, Woe to June!